Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. I'm Dr. Will Duffin. Today I'm speaking to fellow extreme medic Dr. Ffyon Davies, who's a clinical fellow in ED in North Wales and also works with the air ambulance in mountain rescue and has supported many overseas trips, including ultramarathons in the Azores. She's been a medical officer for tall ships in the Atlantic and worked with floating doctors out in Panama. And I invited Ffyon to reflect on both her best case and worst moment in her extreme medicine career so far. The conversation takes us to many places, from managing trauma in the Welsh mountains to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. I really enjoyed Ffyon's candid reflections on the triumphs and challenges of each case. And we talk about team dynamics in mountain rescue, methods for keeping a casualty warm, effective analgesia in trauma, as well as the tension between supporting inexperienced participants to enter wild and dangerous environments versus the safety and ethical implications, why being a medic on Kili is one of the toughest gigs going, what to do when you're struggling yourself at altitude, when everyone in the group is needing treatment and you're faced with the dilemma of, do I carry on or do I need to get off this mountain? And there's loads more in there as well. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Ffyon. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to be hearing a lot more from you because you're actually our newest podcast host. Welcome.
Yes, I'm super excited to be making my first venture into podcasts, and it's really cool to be being interviewed on the other side of it to start with.
Well, it's a great way to get your eye in, isn't it? I know you've got some great guests lined up, so I'm looking forward to listening to those episodes. And we're going to talk about your best case and your worst moment in your career in extreme medicine so far. But you've actually already had enough drama for the day by the sounds of it, because you had a bit of drama with your car on the drive this morning. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so I'm in North Wales and we've got about 2 to 3 inches of snow. And I was pulling up onto the driveway, which is on a bit of a slope. Parked up, got out of the car and came in to get set up for the podcast. And then my mother-in-law ran in saying, "Ffyon, your car slid off the driveway into the road." So hastily had to go and rectify the situation, put the car back in a more sensible parking position, not on a slope.
God, sounds like it's all been happening over there. So your best case, and this is a great case. There's so much rich learning we can take from this. It's brilliant. So this is a search and rescue case. Talk us through what happened, and then we can reflect on some of the learning that came from that. So over to you, Ffyon.
So this case was a mountain rescue case. I'm based in Northeast Wales search and rescue team. We were just finishing up one of our training sessions. We were doing online because it was during COVID times, when we got the beginnings of a call out start to get going, which was great timing because I was about to have another glass of wine. So that was good. We heard that there was a mountain biker who had a fall on a local mountain biking spot, with a mangled leg. We didn't really get much more detail than that, but one of the team members knew one of his friends and they sent through a picture of a sort of makeshift splint with some bits of wood strapped to a leg with a foot obviously pointing in the wrong direction. So we figured that we better get going and started out on the call. So we got there at about sort of 9:30 at night. It was already dark, fairly cold. It was winter time, and he wasn't too far up the trail, luckily. So about sort of 200 meters off the main track, we came across the patient. He had about 3 friends with him who had done their very best to fashion a splint with bits of wood and clothing and sort of strapped them to his leg. They put some coats underneath him very sensibly. And the story was that he'd come off a cliff, well, a small cliff that was about sort of maybe 15 foot high. He'd landed awkwardly and his feet were clipped into the mountain bike. So they were in a fixed position. So his foot had gone one way and his leg had gone the other way, resulting in a really nasty fracture dislocation of his ankle, with his ankle pointing about 90 degrees in the wrong direction. So by this point, he'd been on the floor for about 6 hours or so. He was getting a bit cold. He was in a lot of pain. He'd called for an ambulance, but as I'm sure we're all aware at the moment, the wait for ambulances is significant, and they had other priority patients to get to. So there have been long delays, and they had delayed activating the mountain rescue team because they thought that they were going to get an ambulance and they wouldn't need us. But we arrived, we started coming in drips and drabs, as is the way with the mountain rescue to call out. We had the Land Rover was coming with all our kit, but originally you just get a few team members who assess the situation and sort of create a shopping list of what kit we will need and want. We started, his mates had already done a pretty good job of insulating him and keeping him warm. They had lots of jackets piled on top of him and stuff. We cut his trousers off and we cut his boot off as well, which he wasn't happy about because they were very expensive apparently. We had a good look at the injury. So his foot was obviously dislocated and he said he couldn't feel it when we were touching over the sort of top dorsum of his foot. He had a delayed cap refill time of around about 5 seconds or so. It felt pretty cold to touch, but to be honest, he felt pretty cold to touch all over because of the temperature outside and how long he'd been on the floor. He had quite a lot of swelling, the beginning of some bruising, and some critical skin over his malleolus as well, where the bone was sort of pushing up against the skin, making it turn white. The rest of the team started arriving. We did a quick primary survey, established that there wasn't any other serious injuries that we were concerned about, as we were aware that this ankle was quite distracting. And as we arrived, we started getting him ready to pull this ankle. We knew that we were going to pull it because there was neurovascular compromise. So we gave him some morphine, we gave him some Entonox, we got the sort of vacuum splint ready and a blizzard blanket, started keeping him warm, and we started assembling a stretcher to get with a wheel in order to get him off the mountain biking track. We had a few more team members arriving at this point, so there's probably about maybe 4 to 5 of us around the actual casualty, and then there's another probably 10 to 15 in the background who were sort of running to the Land Rover, getting bits of kit, putting the stretcher together, organising his evacuation from where he was on the mountain biking track. So there was quite a lot going on in the background. I was lucky that we had another doctor arrive as well. So one of our other team doctors, he's a cardiologist in the day, mountain rescue doctor by night. And we had made a joint decision at this point that we needed to pull the ankle. We discussed this with the patient, explained what we were going to do. And then because we were sort of discussing who was going to get to pull this ankle, and just by nature of I'm an A&E doctor, I see ankles fairly regularly and pull them again fairly regularly, and he's a cardiologist and he doesn't really get much opportunity to pull ankles, or if he has, something's gone seriously wrong in his day job. So he was keen to do the procedure, and he'd done a few before with mountain rescue but not for a while. Explained it all to the patient, explained it to the team, briefed them on what we were going to do, and got all our kit ready and laid out so that we could sort of swiftly pull his ankle with somebody doing counter traction, and then get him into a vacuum splint as soon as possible. And then we had the stretcher ready so that we could then package him up, get him to hospital, which is ultimately what he needed. So the actual pulling of the ankle was kind of unremarkable. Went really well. So Patrick, the cardiologist, was pulling on the ankle. We had one of our other team members doing counter traction, and then myself just kind of overseeing the situation and making sure he was adequately analgesied. He had enough Entonox. He was puffing away really well on it. Assured the casualty that it was okay to swear. This was an appropriate situation in which swearing was okay. And then after a really good hard pull, saw the ankle, saw it clunk back into place, rotated it back round so the foot was in a more anatomical position. And then we'd already marked out where his dorsalis pedis pulse was. So rechecked his pulse afterwards, rechecked his cap refill time and his neurovascular status, and it was all improving after we'd pulled it. So we then sort of had an added complication of trying to get into hospital because we knew we weren't getting an ambulance, and mountain rescue can't technically transport patients to hospital, but that's kind of that's kind of a different story. We did eventually take him in the back of the Land Rover after a lot of umming and ahhing. When we got him to hospital, he had a he had a trimalleolar fracture, and something that we had missed was a fibular fracture a little bit higher up the leg, which we just had been so distracted by this ankle and how it was so out of place and deformed that we had not really assessed the rest of his leg in detail. And so when they did the x-rays later on, it did turn out he had a fibular fracture higher up as well.
Yeah, it's a really great case, Ffyon, and it's something we teach a lot on our courses is fracture reduction in the field and managing trauma like this. And there's so many positives about how you work together as a team. And one interesting aspect of this is how, normally with flash teams, you all arrive on the scene at the same time, but you said you're arriving in dribs and drabs. That must have made it quite tricky when some people had started and others suddenly kind of filter in, and to keep that mental model shared around the team. Was that a kind of a challenge when new members arrived and needed to kind of understand where you're up to and what the current plan of action was?
Yeah, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people in hospital as well. When you get sort of cardiac arrests and you get the team arriving in drips and drabs, it's really challenging to keep everybody informed, but still not find yourself giving about 10 handovers to 10 different people. So the way we run it a lot of the time in Mountain Rescue is that we've got a sort of overall incident commander who is not directly involved with the casualty, but is kind of making sure that the people looking after the casualty, the CAS carers we call them, have got all the equipment they need, and that they're thinking about the next steps of what needs to happen. So we need to put the stretcher together, we need to get the Land Rover up the track, we need to be calling his family, we need to be thinking about which hospital we're going to, etc. So they're kind of big picture coordinators. So there's a lot of communication that goes on between that incident commander and the people looking after the casualty and the rest of the team. So he kind of sends runners to and from the casualty site and the sort of equipment dump that we have where we put all our kit together. I think keeping the two things separate is a really useful thing that possibly we could adopt a little bit more in healthcare as well. That the equipment layout, getting the stretcher together, getting the vacuum mattress, getting the blizzard blanket, is all separate to actually where the casualty is. And if we, looking after the casualty, say, oh, we need a vacuum splint, we've got a runner who will go over to the kit dump, grab it for us, bring it back. In terms of keeping everybody on the same page, we try to have a sort of core casualty carers who are looking after the patient, and then we tend to be static. So we won't be moving from the casualty side. So any developments that go along the way, or decision-making processes, or sharing our mental model as we go, we tend to all be on the same page. Sometimes you get people arriving in drips and drabs after that point, in which case you need to just give them a quick sort of 1 minute handover and what you need them to do next. So job allocation and role allocation is really important. And along with that goes the sort of being a good team member and good followership. So not sort of arriving into the situation, trying to take over without knowing all of the information, but actually saying, right, hi, I'm here, what can I do?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. Is when I've been in similar situations, it's always surprised me just how much complexity there is and how many different tasks need to be completed, and to release your bandwidth to be more patient focused, knowing that you have those big picture coordinators backing you up, I think is really, really key in a high functioning team. And it sounds to me, I mean, I really like the fact that, as a team, you're able to enable the cardiologist in the group to do the actual procedure, because the kind of learning value to him was so much greater. That it really speaks to you having a really kind of warm and supportive culture within that team, that you're able to do that. You weren't all just jostling to get in and do the exciting bit.
Yeah, and it's actually quite unusual for us to have two doctors on a call. Usually there would be no doctors, and so it's not uncommon for us when either myself or Patrick, the doctor, are out on a mountain rescue call out. We usually are not hands on. We are usually kind of supervising, overseeing, because we would far rather support our well-trained and highly trained CAS carers to get that experience and to be in the position, but knowing that they've got a doctor on their shoulder. So if they're not sure, they can always ask us something. Far rather do that and allow the sort of electricians, plumbers, secretaries in the team who are our usual CAS carers and probably go to far more of the call outs than the docs do and the actual healthcare professionals. I'd far rather invest my time and effort in training them and supporting them than rushing in and taking over and being hands-on and clinical. So yeah, it's not unusual for us as the doctors to be taking a step back and to be sort of, right, yeah, you're doing a really good job, mate. What else can I do to help you out?
Yeah. Really, really interesting to hear that. You say that tension between being a good leader and knowing when to step in, but also being a good follower and knowing when to have that light touch approach and allow others to really just kind of do their job and just be there in the background supporting them, rather than just trying to be, like a helicopter, just hovering over them and just trying to micromanage everything. I really like your kind of your style of your approach there. One interesting aspect of this was the delayed delayed response to the casualty. And this was 9:30 in the evening that you actually had the call out, and I gather the actual, not many people are out mountain biking at 9:30 in the evening. I think it happened a lot earlier in the day, but for whatever reason things got delayed and maybe the conventional ambulance wasn't available. So the casualty had actually been out on the hill for quite a prolonged period and must have been quite cold by the time you got to them. Keeping casualties warm, even in regular land ambulance, is hard enough. But what kind of techniques and equipment did you use out on the hill there to keep that casualty warm from the point that you arrived right up until you bundled in the back of Land Rover and actually finally got them to definitive care?
So, as I kind of mentioned, his friends had already done a fairly good job of insulating him, and I think they lived nearby, and so they sent somebody out, and they'd already been there for 6 hours, so they'd had some time, but they'd sent somebody back to a house, and they'd got sort of big parka jackets and a sort of sleeping bag and stuff like that, and they'd covered him over with that. The main issue they had was that they were really reluctant to move him too much because of how much pain he was in. So they kind of stuffed it under him as much as possible. I think some of our role in improving his warmth and keeping him nice and toasty was actually just being willing to inflict a tiny bit of pain to get him into a better position, and just having the confidence to do that as sort of the professionals, rather than, you can totally understand if it's your mate, you don't want to put them in pain, but sometimes you've got to cause a little bit of pain just to position them a bit better. So then we had a blizzard blanket laid out, and then we moved the casualty from where he was onto the blizzard blanket. Something we did with this casualty that we've not done previously was we actually cut out a bit of blizzard blanket and we put it on the inside of the vacuum splint to try and insulate his foot a bit better, because at this point, you're told to get them trauma naked and you cut off all their clothes and they're already freezing and they've been on the floor for 6 hours and they just get colder and colder. The other top tip that I've learnt is, rather than cutting up the front of the trousers, cut up the side, and then you can use the flap to cover them back over so that there's still some warmth in there as well. The same with jackets, rather than cutting up the front, cut up the side. We also have like chemical ready heat pads that we put on casualties to keep them nice and warm. And again, part of that incident commander role is going to be getting the Land Rover heated up and ready and as close to the casualty as we can possibly be, so that when we get him in there, he's got a nice warm environment to get into.
Yeah, brilliant. And let's talk about the distracting injury, because this is a pitfall we all fall into. Obviously, there's the ankle's facing at 90 degrees to where it should be, so that is clearly the main pathology. But subsequently there was that high fibular fracture that came out in the ED assessment, kind of cold light of day, if you like. It clearly didn't impact on the patient's care. You dealt with the limb-threatening injury that was presented to you. But what are your reflections on that? Having something such as an obvious kind of mechanism of injury and the kind of clinical findings in front of you, and how we can prevent ourselves from perhaps missing any other potentially significant injuries from doing our kind of full primary survey. What are your reflections on that?
Yeah, I think that my original reaction to finding out that he had this high fibular fracture was oh crap, we've missed something here. We should have picked that up. And then with a little bit more thought process about it, there was no significant harm. We did come. We were a little bit slow, I think, in doing our initial primary survey because there was such an obvious injury, and he's screaming in pain, and it's really distracting. And so all you want to do is kind of just try and sort that out first, because it is so distracting that you almost can't do anything else because he's in so much pain.
Yeah.
So we were a little bit slow on doing the primary survey, but I think one of us eventually, I don't think it was me, I think somebody sort of said, oh yeah, we should probably do our primary survey, and have we considered C-spine, and have we listened to his chest, has he got any chest pain, and all of that good stuff as well. So we did get down to that, and then I think we possibly nicked a bit because we established there was no long bone injuries, we didn't think there was a pelvic injury, and then lower leg, I think possibly just got all sort of lumped into one area. So we were like, yeah, we know there's an ankle fracture, the femur's fine, and the pelvis is fine. So we didn't sort of have a good feel all the way down. I think possibly the other thing is that he was in so much pain that he was probably not really able to differentiate what was hurting at that point. If it was the ankle or the leg or the sort of the upper fibular injury either. So I think being really systematic, and I think the other thing that really helped was addressing analgesia early, because it actually just calms the whole situation down a lot.
Yeah.
He was in so much pain. He was screaming. Yeah. And once we got him sucking on the Entonox, it A, gives him something to do, and B, helps with the pain massively and quickly. So that then just de-escalates the whole situation.
Yeah, I think that, if you've not got big C bleeding or, immediately life-threatening problem, then I think just taking the time to get that analgesia on board is, like you say, just makes the whole assessment a lot easier. You're not going to hear anything with a stethoscope on his chest anyway if he's screaming out in pain. So yeah, I think that's really good reflection. Brilliant. Any final thoughts from you, Ffyon, before we move on to the next part of this conversation? Any final reflections or learning that you've taken from this brilliant case?
I think this was one of my best cases with mountain rescue because A, there was some brilliant trauma involved, not for the patient, but this was a great learning experience for the team because it's very unusual for us to actually pull fractures in the field. And also like the differences between attending a call out with a mountain rescue team versus being an expedition doctor is very different when you've got a whole team of really highly trained guys and girls who are on the same page. This is what we train for. This is what we've got the kit for. And it when it all works well, it's really effortless, and it usually results in great clinical care. And that's as a result of a lot of hard work and training by volunteers. But I think reflecting on that and how that's different to an expedition doctor, when you're on your own and you often don't have a team, it's a very different sort of situation. Yes. And I think that'll probably be reflected by our next case.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's loads of great stuff, and absolutely with that mountain rescue case, there's so much that went right there, and that really speaks to all the training that you've done and how that team functions well. And it's really great to hear that patient received such excellent care. So really, really good job. Let's have a look now at we're shifting from mountain rescue into expedition. We're going to look at your worst moment, and this was a summit day on the Mashami route of Kilimanjaro. Now, you were quite green. This is your first foray into expedition medic at altitude. And tell us, Ffyon, tell us how that went.
Yeah, so I was super excited to get my first Kilimanjaro medic job, going up the Machami route, as you said. And I think I'll just dive straight in there with the story. So we had just got to Camp 4, Barafu Camp, and we descended from 900 meters, which is where you sort of start the hike from, to 4,800 meters, which is where Camp 4 is, in about 4 days or so. So with some quick maths there, most expedition medics are going to tell you that that's a ridiculous amount of scent in a very short time, which is true. So we did our sort of evening checks on everybody at base camp, ready for our summit attempt. And we checked everybody's sats, we checked everybody's heart rates, we sort of general check-in, is everybody feeling okay? At this point, I think we'd lost one group member due to a dental problem, actually. But apart from that, everybody was feeling okay. So we got up at about midnight or so. We'd had about 2 hours of sleep to start our summit day. The temperature was about -20 or so. It's dark outside. It's pitch black, and all we can see in front of us is leading up a hill that we can't see the top of, a very long trail of head torches and a series of switchbacks up the mountain in front of us. So it seems pretty endless. You can't really see the summit. Pretty much all of our team are on acetazolamide at this point. A lot of them had started out without, and then as they got a little bit higher, they decided that they wanted to start the acetazolamide. Most of us were having mild symptoms of AMS, as you would expect with that sort of ascent. So we were having headaches. Some people had vomited. There was some diarrhea. There was some breathlessness. There was the occasional chest tightness. Everybody's sats were sitting around the sort of 80 point. So some guys had sats down to about 72 or so was the lowest, but they felt okay and they had no signs of any HAPE or HACE. So we're trudging up the mountain in the darkness, staring at our feet, just literally moving our feet about 6 inches at a time at a super slow pace. It's what the porters call poly, which is just slowly. And mainly, you can't move any faster than that because that's all the oxygen will allow. We're trying to stay awake, and people are literally falling asleep on their feet as they're walking because it's just so monotonous. You're just putting one foot in front of the other as you trudge up the mountain. And we're moving just about fast enough to stay warm. We're stopping about once an hour for 5 minutes or so in order to sip some water, have a little snack. And we know that we've got approximately 8 to 10 hours more of this until we get to the summit. So safe to say morale is pretty low, and we're all struggling a little bit, including me. And every time we stopped, I was being asked to check other members of the group. So-and-so's feeling a bit sick. So-and-so's got a headache. He's not walking very well, or so-and-so's falling asleep all the time. And so it was a little bit relentless in that 5-minute break. And it often meant that I wasn't getting time to drink and I wasn't getting time to eat. And so it was very much a case of putting everybody else and their well-being and my role as the medic looking after them over my own at that point. So this meant that I was getting dehydrated, I was getting fatigued, and I hadn't eaten anything. And then my camelback froze and my Nalgene froze. And so I didn't have any water, even if I did have time to drink it. And in terms of how I was doing mentally, I've never been so cold, ever. My fingers were just incredibly cold. I had all of my layers on, 2 down jackets, and pretty much everything else that I owned. I had a headache, I felt sick, I'd retched a few times, I'd taken some ondansetron, I was on acetazolamide, and I'd taken paracetamol and ibuprofen. I felt shortness of breath, I had chest tightness. I felt like if you've ever been to a spin class and they make you sprint and your heart rate's going at approximately 180 and you think you're about to pass out and die. I felt like that constantly for about 8 hours. So it was super unpleasant.
Oh dear.
I'm pretty relentless. And anyway, so the group starts to split up. Everybody's feeling roughly as bad as each other. There was one slightly faster group, one slightly slower group. And I decided to go with the faster group for a couple of different reasons. And, this is up for debate whether or not this was the right decision. But I thought it was going to be easier to descend than it was to ascend. And so if I was with the faster group, then it was going to be easier to go back down than it was to try and, there was absolutely no question that I was not going to be sprinting up this mountain. So the faster group was also slightly larger, and they were also the people who were pushing themselves. And so I was concerned that if they pushed themselves too far, they would then sort of, not do so well higher up. The slower group were a bit more measured, a bit more steady, and both groups had porters with them who had means of communicating with each other, so they could tell us whether somebody was struggling and needed my help. Everybody had a pill in the pocket, which was recommended by one of the previous medics, which was ondansetron, and I made sure everybody had paracetamol and ibuprofen as well. So that the idea of that was to try and offload some of the workload off me. After sort of deciding that I was going to go with the faster group, morale, like I've already mentioned, was extremely low. There was a moment where I felt that it was my role to keep encouraging the team, motivating the team, keeping them going, although I was seriously struggling myself and just wanted to turn around and go back down. And I had that thought, and I sort of shouted out to the team, does anyone want to go back down? And everybody sort of mumbled, no. And then I sort of shouted, does anyone want to go back down? And then we had a more resounding, no. So we carried on plodding up this endless hill towards the summit. And I also had a thought that no matter how miserable or terrible this is, it's still not as bad as an A&E night shift. So that was a comforting thought. I was pretty pleased with that. Yeah. So, and pleased to say that, most of the team did make it to the top. There was no major incidents. There was no major illnesses or anything like that. The slower group did turn around and go back down once they got to Stellar Point, which is the sort of main checkpoint on the way up to the summit. And once the sun rose and everything got a lot warmer and lighter and we could see where we were going, rather than this endless plod, everybody started feeling a bit better after that, and plodded on up to the summit.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a really tough gig, a really particularly tough summit, and you were on the mountain for 20 hours. I gather your whole summit bid. It's a prolonged ordeal.
Very long day.
Yeah. This really resonates for me as well, Ffyon, because my first ever gig 10 years ago as an expedition medic was at Kilimanjaro as well. And I had, in many ways, a similar experience. It took us a long time to do the summit. And if people were keeling over like flies as well. And I think it's interesting how easy it is for people to underestimate Kilimanjaro. I mean, it's a non-technical trekking peak, but it's still the highest freestanding mountain on Earth, and every year there's still significant medical incidents. People die summiting it. The numbers of people going up, and also like you said, the ascent profiles are often very, very unsafe. Back in the day, they used to have a 5-day Marangu route, which was just complete suicide, and the rates of severe AMS, haste and hate were through the roof. And I think they've cut back on that, and we're seeing a lot more 8-9 day longer, more sensible ascent profiles. But still, that Machami route still pretty gnarly, isn't it? And there's every medic I speak to who's done this, there's been the doc for a Kilimanjaro trek has always had some action. It's a tough gig, isn't it?
It's a very tough gig, and I think I was quite naive going into it and didn't really ask too many questions about the route or the ascent profile. And after coming back, and there's another medic who was on the trip with me, who was with another group, And we sort of came back down after the summit night, and it was sort of 20 hours of trekking, and his group was a lot slower than mine as well, so he was actually out there for a lot longer. And he just kind of limped into camp, a broken medic, and sort of just said to me, that was awful. And we just looked at each other and we said, that was terrible. Let's not do that again. And we've been in touch since, and we've both reflected on the whole experience, and I think spoken to other medics who've done Kili as well. And everybody says the same thing. Everybody says that this is an underestimated extreme ascent profile where people get sick. And it's a predictable thing because you're ascending so quickly. And it's also a mountain where it's not technical, which means that you get a lot of trekkers who are not necessarily that experienced, and it may be their mountain altitude. So that sort of plays into it as well. And I think there's a lot of controversy to be had about the actual routes. And of course, the actual companies have got a vested interest in getting as many people up and down the mountain as possible. And so they want to do it as quickly as possible. And they say, yep, the Machame route is fine. You know, it's a well-established route, and that's the one that we always do. And there will always be medics who are out there looking for their first expedition job who are happy to say, yeah, okay, I'll go on the Machame route. Yes. And then it's only
become cannon
fodder. Little bit later on, maybe they realise this is not a good idea. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if you want to get some medical hands-on wilderness medicine experience, it's a great way to go about it. But yeah, it's certainly not the easiest gig out there. One aspect of this, which I find fascinating, which you touched on there, Ffyon, was this. There's obviously a vested commercial interest to get as many people to the top as possible. And also the individuals that do this trip, they're often fundraising for charities that are very meaningful to them, and they've often got lots of interesting journeys. Some of them are completely sedentary people, barely done anything, and they've essentially done not couch to 5K, but couch to Kilimanjaro, which is a remarkable feat. Don't get me wrong, and they're very driven people. And as medics, we're supporting that. We are there to provide a margin of safety to enable that to happen, and all that fundraising for those brilliant charities, and obviously the companies benefit from that. But then there's always a part of me as well when I'm on the mountain with these people where I kind of had this, and this sounds very unkind, but I don't know if you have the same thoughts, but I feel you shouldn't belong here. And to use a quote from Lawrence Gonzalez, who wrote Deep Survival, he said, to enter the wilderness, to challenge the forces of nature, we must be worthy. And worthiness doesn't come from a weekend survival school, the Eagle Scouts, or even a few years in the military. And I felt that that worthiness wasn't there with many of the participants. As much of the altruistic reasons for doing that challenge, I kind of felt, we're in this weird commercial situation whereby, you're here in this extreme environment and you're not physically capable of doing this, and all the forces are pushing you to the top. But is this the right thing to be doing? It just, part of it felt a bit wrong to me. Did you get that same sense as well? And how did you manage to reconcile that in your own head?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you say that, because the thought crossed my mind. I think I had a great group who were raising money for a charity, and they're all sort of young adults, fairly fit, however minimal mountain experience amongst them. And I think there was a lot of other groups on the mountain who were very different in that they were paying for a holiday to climb Kilimanjaro, or they were very much different nationalities of different expectations as well. So I'm sure people might know what I mean when I say that some people are paying people to get them to the top, and that is the expectation, and they won't take no for an answer. And there were some groups there like that. And there's also, you pay a lot of money for a service, and the porters and the tents and the cooking and the whole sort of carrying your bag up the mountain. And some people, this is an absolute privilege and they're not expecting this. And for some people, this is absolutely what they paid for, and the food's not good enough, and the camp isn't very comfortable, and their tent's not big enough. And, and I think a lot of the reason why we do this is not for any of those. It's it's to be in these incredible places, away from people like that.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and and with like-minded people who are appreciating the nature, the views, the challenge, the experience, the privilege of being in such an unusual,
Yes.
and challenging environment. And I think it's really hard when everybody else's values and reasons for being there don't gel with your own.
Yeah, that really also resonates with my experience. I think there's two different types of participants on these trips. Some who really do relish the challenge, and yet they haven't done the training. They're not really fit enough. They've never been to altitude. But part of you is like, well, you're having a go. We'll give you a good go. But there's some people that just go for the holiday. They really want a kind of hotel kind of experience. They're not really mucking in with the group. They're not really team players. They're really just very much focused on their own kind of needs, their own internal world. And I think they're the minority that are the most difficult to deal with as the trip medic. Yeah, it's it's interesting, isn't it? Just thinking
I
about
think where that comes into,
yeah,
I was really lucky with my own group that they were a very undemanding and grateful
yeah,
and group to be there, and they'd raised a lot of money in order to be there, and so they'd already done an incredible amount. But my colleague I mentioned, he was with a group who were, they were also raising money for the same charity. However, their employer, had paid all of the money for them, into the charity, and so they'd actually invested very little of their time and effort in actually, raising money for the charity. So they were a little bit more demanding, a little bit more privileged, and a little bit more. They were older, and originally, the other medic thought that was going to be a good thing because they would be more self-sufficient and more mature, and they were going to look after themselves better. And that turned out to be the complete opposite. They were heavily reliant on him, and there was big demands on his time, and his expertise all of the
yeah, yeah.
way, which was really hard for him.
And I've had moments like, it was fortunate when I did Kili. It turns out I'm a fast acclimatizer, which is lucky. So I felt okay in myself, and when I did the Inca Trail similarly. But then I did Everest Base Camp, and for some reason, for the first time, the altitude absolutely hit me like a freight train when I got up to Gorak Shep and the final part of that. And that was also when the group were most needy, when we got into camp and they just needed all kinds of stuff doing, and I just felt like shit. And it's just when you're not on point, when you're really feeling the strain of it all, and everyone's turning to you, that is really difficult as a medic, isn't it? When you're just holding on to things yourself, and you've got to have that extra reserve to then take on the needs of other people. That is a really dark place to be in, isn't it? I've experienced that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, my approach to this, which I sort of very much developed along the way, along Kilimanjaro, was, being really honest with my team, and I expected that honesty back in return. But it was like, guys, like, I'm really not feeling good. You know, I've got a headache. I didn't sleep. I think I'm going to throw up. And just sharing that. And actually, I think, what that meant was that then my team could see that I was also feeling shit, and I was getting on with it, and I was doing it, and I was mucking in, and I was still doing my part. And that then therefore creates the expectation that they will as well. But it also creates an environment where they feel they can share how they're feeling as well. And so you don't get so much of the people concealing symptoms. No, I feel fine. No, I'm okay. I'll just carry on. Or no, I don't need any paracetamol right now. I'm all right. You don't get that kind of macho, kind of covering up environment. And if that comes from the medic, you are a leader amongst a team, whether it's in name or not. And if it comes from the medic and you say, guys, like, I'm really not feeling it, yeah, 100%, I'm going to have a look at your feet, and I'm going to sort out your headache, and I'm going to have a look at that. But just to let you know, I'm not 100%. And then it does, I think, help improve the team dynamic overall as well. I think my own personal struggle was, at what point do you become too unwell to be the medic?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. But one thing I really liked that you did there, Fionn, was you modelled vulnerability to the rest of the team, and you made it okay to show weakness. And I think there's a great pressure on us as medics. We always have this hero complex, and we always want to be the strong rock at the team that anyone can turn to, and we'll sort them out, and we'll just be there. But we're still human beings, and we still succumb to the same issues with altitude. And I think you had the humility to do that, and that's a really powerful thing to show to that group. And also, like you say, it encourages that behavior in them, that they can then come to you, and they're not just going to conceal things, that it's going to build trust, and open up the kind of channels of communication between you. So that's brilliant. But yeah, to come back to your last point there about at what point as the medic, what point do you throw in the towel yourself? Because there is a time, if you're just ill, if you've got severe AMS, you shouldn't be ascending. What point do you say, look, I've got to go down, and there might not be anyone there to tell you to do that. That has to be a kind of, you have to have the self-awareness to know when to tap out and take yourself down, and leave the group behind without a medic. And that feels like a real dereliction of duty, doesn't it? It feels like you've really failed everyone if you do that. What was going through your head when you were really suffering and you're still climbing up to the summit? How did you make sense of that, and how did you come to the decision that you'd continue and push on to the top?
I think me and the other medic who were with the same group, but we weren't sort of on the mountain at the same points, if you get what I mean. So we weren't right next to each other. But we'd had a chat about this at base camp, and we'd said we were worried that we would lose insight into when we're actually too unwell to continue. So in the sort of situation where you've developed HACE or something like that, and you really can't make a decision on whether or not you're okay to go on. Obviously, we're hoping it never got to that point, but that was something we were worried about, and we discussed with each other. I didn't have a clear cut-off in my head, but I suppose what I felt was mild AMS, although it feels mild to moderate potentially, although it feels very unpleasant. I knew that none of my symptoms were of HAPE or HACE. So I was happy that was a manageable thing. I think if I potentially hadn't been sleeping or hadn't been eating or had been in a worse physical state than I was, that might have been a different story. But at the time that I was plodding up the mountain, I was reassured that everybody else felt as bad as I did. So that was reassuring in a way. But that I was capable of carrying on, and that I was safe to carry on. I think what was going through my head, just as you were phrasing that question as well, was that we had a medic at Moshi who was on the end of the phone. So if we were not sure about a decision, we could call them up and ask for advice from somebody who was not hypoxic at 5,000 meters. That was a really nice safety net to have. And even before our summit push, again, me and the other medic would have a little powwow at the end of the day and say, like, look, mate, how are you feeling? You okay? What sort of things are you coming across in your group? What are you doing for that? Oh, you're doing that? Okay, that's interesting. Maybe I'll do that for my group. So we were sort of supporting each other along the way, which was a really useful thing for us, I think. So knowing that we had another medic on the mountain who may be able to take over if we can't, and B, a medic at base camp who can make sensible decisions if we can't, and is on the end of the phone for advice, was really important for us.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best mentors I've had have been the trip leaders, actually, the non-medics on these trips. That, when we've really gelled, it's really helped, and they've been able to share some of their challenges with managing aspects of the group, and I've been able to reflect, bounce off some of my kind of medical concerns, and I think having just a trusted confidant on those trips that you can just bounce some ideas off really helps, I think, to keep you level and grounded and make sensible decisions rather than all just swimming around in your own head.
Absolutely, having somebody to bounce
another
ideas
aspect
off
of
is
this,
invaluable.
Massively. Another aspect which is really challenging, and this has happened every time I've done summits like this, is the group with the kind of charity checking sector. You have a mixture of ability. group always spreads into this long, drawn out kind of train rather than being this tight pack, that kind of just goes up and down together. There's always the stragglers at the back, and then the kind of keen beans at the front. And as the medic, I mean, historically in the companies I've worked for, I've always been at the back. That's where they kind of want you, as the back. But most of the dramas all happen further up front and at different points along that line, and it's made it really difficult with everyone being so spread out. And what I wonder really like, which I wish I'd done actually, is the pill in the pocket, giving everyone some ondansetron and paracetamol so they can kind of self-medicate. I didn't even have any buccal antiemetics at all. That I wish I did, because I only had IM Stemetil, so I was having to get a needle and syringe out every time I needed to give someone an antiemetic who couldn't tolerate an oral route. And that was a major faff, and used up a lot of my time when they could have just done that themselves with a bit of buccal ondansetron or prochlorperazine. That's another great option. So I like the way you've kind of prepared for that. But even with those measures, the pill in the pocket approach, you still feel yourself spread quite thinly along that line. How did you find that aspect of the challenge?
Yeah, I think I spoke about, I was deciding whether or not I was going to go with the faster group or the slower group. I think at this point I had spent 4 days with these guys, and I was getting to know them quite well. And I'd spent most of those 4 days at the back, trying to establish who was the fitter ones, who are the ones to watch, who are the ones that were struggling. And I think just chatting to people as well was really important, and just establishing people's mindset and their motivation. And are you struggling because you're physically struggling, or are you struggling because you're mentally struggling? And I had quite a lot of chats with the team leader actually as well, the expedition leader, who was probably a little bit more cautious than I am in a way, because he was sort of, oh, so and so is really slow, they're really struggling, don't know if they're going to make it. And I said, they're absolutely solid, they're a steady plodder, they're going to keep going, and they are not struggling physically. From a medical perspective, they are absolutely fine. This is in their head. This is them trying to struggle through a really big challenge. So in terms of the spreading thinly, knowing your team members, knowing what they're likely to be struggling with, and who is your biggest risks, goes along with that. So I was more concerned about the people who were going to keep quiet, keep plodding, and just try and pace it to the top, the slightly faster people, than I was about the slower group, who were actually the steady plodders, who were going to turn around if it got too much, and were sensible about that. So I was less concerned about them. The pill in the pocket was a really good idea. It was from the medic before me, and it probably saved me a lot of time and effort. I cannot imagine having to give that many IM injections to people. It would have been super unpleasant. Every time you took your gloves off, your hands get freezing. It would have been really difficult.
It didn't work. I can
so yeah, that was a really good thing. I briefed them quite thoroughly about what I wanted them to do. So I was like, if you feel sick, you take this tablet. If you get a headache, you take paracetamol. And if you still have a headache after an hour, then you take ibuprofen. And then you come to me. Because I want to know if you're taking all those things and it's not working, I want to know about it. But I was hopefully trying to avoid everybody coming to me for everything and getting overwhelmed.
And that's the real value of that medical brief before the expedition is being able to clearly lay out, will promote self-care, but where the limit of that is reached, then you do need to kind of be involved. That's a really important thing to do.
It's almost like safety netting, when you send somebody home.
So one thing we were told when we did ours, that your water does freeze. It was -20 with wind chill on our summit night as well. And one thing we found, I don't know if this is helpful, we boiled water before we left. We actually left at 11 p.m, not midnight, because we had a particularly slow group. So we wanted to give ourselves a head start. Literally everyone overtook us as we were going up towards the summit. But we boiled water and put them in kind of metal flasks and stuffed those into our jacket. So it was kind of gave you heat as you were going up. and nothing froze. And then obviously you always had water, and you always had that extra source of warmth. So that really worked well for us. But I've seen a lot of people whose camelback tubing froze, and no water up there is just bad times, and you get dehydrated, and it really bites you, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people mentioned like insulated camelback pipes and things like that, but I think they still freeze. Having a warm water to start with and inside your jacket, that sounds pretty dreamy.
Okay, great. Well, Ffyon, I think we've there's some brilliant cases there. Thanks. So we've had your best case mountain rescue with reducing that ankle out on the mountain and successfully casevacing that patient, getting them all the way to hospital. And then your worst moment being your first foray as an expedition doctor on Mount Kilimanjaro, and just feeling like shit at altitude, and having to kind of push through that, get people up and back from the summit. But you got through it, and loads of learning has come out of both of those events. So thanks for being so candid and sharing all of the things that went well and didn't go so well. I think it's such an important process that we all need to go through after being involved in expedition wilderness medicine, so that we can keep learning and improving and delivering the best care we can for the patients.
Yeah, thank you so much for it's been a really interesting conversation, some things that I've not thought about before as well. So yeah, it's always a pleasure to reflect on experiences with a different point of view. So thank you for your really interesting questions, Will.
Thanks, Ffyon, and we'll look forward to listening to your podcast episodes. They'll be out very soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And now I've picked up all the top tips from you. I'm going to be using them in my future episodes.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars, and indeed a collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical, and performance medicine. Thanks again.